What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason and Joe here with the first ever classic review on the channel. If you're new here, normally what we do is deep dives of artists and years, and we dig through tons of albums at once. But rarely do we go back and review an old record. We do sometimes, quite often, review new music, but today we're going to go back and look at a record turning 30 years old. That is Dookie by Green Day, released February 1st, 1994, produced by Rob Cavallo and the band, recorded at Fantasy Studios in Berkeley, California. Joe, I know, likes Green Day. I don't know how much he likes Green Day. I don't know what kind of pedestal you put Dookie on. I'm a known Green Day hater, but I will say that it's more the American Idiot and After era that I really cannot stand. I'm a little softer on the older Green Day stuff, so I think maybe some people will be interested to hear my thoughts on this particular record. What you got on Dookie?
Well, this is an interesting one. Uh, there's so much like legend and what's a good word for it? I mean, it's one of those albums that's sort of like held up as a 90s, a pinnacle of a 90s sound. It has such a legacy. It has such an influence on pretty much, music to this day. I mean, you can still hear more than maybe any other 90s other than, maybe like The Chronic and some rap albums. Like the sound of this album and the attitude of, the lyrics and the sound and that brattiness and some humor in there. So it's incredibly influential. And I remember, listening to it growing up. I didn't own it, but a bunch of my friends, a bunch of my older sister and her friends, and just like hearing these songs forever for the past 30 years nonstop, on any alternative channel, you're gonna hear a million of these songs. A lot of them from this album, and it's just interesting to go back to it now. I didn't grow up loving it. I wasn't holding up my copy of Dookie. I'm sure lots of kids older than me, maybe I was only 9 when it came out, so I wasn't listening to music. So I don't have that like emotional attachment to Dookie. But, I've listened to it many times. I think it's a good album. I like these singles. I like these songs. I like that Green Day sold out and decided to go for this kind of sound. I listened to Kerplunk, which is the one that came before it for this review. And it's you can tell it's the same band, but the production and the mixing, production from Rob Cavallo and the mixing from Jerry Finn just made such a huge difference in the sound. And hearing it, it's like, wow, this is such a modern copied sound that you hear forever. I mean, Blink 182 and Sum 41 and Paramore and every band that even like has touched, pop punk sounds exactly like this. If they go mainstream, this is exactly the sound that they're going for. Those bright guitars, real strong melodies, really rooted in pop, that great bass sound, so punchy, especially on this album from Mike Dirnt. The really, fast drumming. I don't know how complex it is, but it's a ton of fills. It's really, pops really well. And you got the bratty vocals from Billy Joe, that nasally, oft imitated sound. These are just good songs that sound really good. And Longview, I think they're really clever. They're really funny. Longview and Basket Case, I think are just really well-written songs. Have a lot of that pop sheen to them. Some punk, not too much punk. I mean, it really is a separation between like punk, what came before this, and then like the pop punk sound. But I think it all works. I think She's a great song. When I Come Around, it's a classic. Welcome to Paradise, really cool bass parts. I, played along with these growing up when I started playing bass. Just a ton of fun to play with. And I just think it's a good album. I don't know if it's like a the critic in me says this is a 5-star album. The just sort of like this is a personal opinion. It's a 4-star album for me. I think it's very good. There's a couple stinkers on here. Pulling Teeth, Eminence Sleepus, the Mike Dirnt track. They're not great, but I think the sound of it's great, and I think it's a fun record without thinking of the legacy and the history and how much it influenced everything else. I think it's a good 4-star album that had, a huge outsized influence on music for, forever to this day. The influence and the legacy of this album is very apparent.
Well, I know the singles to this record, and I would be willing to bet that I have heard this in its entirety before. This is one of like the first records that I really remember like friends of mine like being super into. I was 10 when this came out, and it was like this and Smash by The Offspring. Like everyone, all of my friends were into those two records a ton. I was still living in classic rock world, super into like Kiss and Todd and stuff. And wasn't as I actually remember two friends of mine that I had kind of like gotten into Kiss and had shown them Kiss. And I remember they actually sat me down and were like, we don't really like Kiss anymore. We're into Green Day. And I was like pretty bummed out about that. Uh, but so I'm sure I've heard this. This was around just like in the air at the time, huge record. But it's not something that I have ever gone back to or like I don't remember any of these tracks except for the hits, which I obviously still hear all the time. So it's pretty much like a new listen for me. Like I said, I don't like Green Day really at all, especially starting at American Idiot and onward. But I do entirely recognize why this was a huge record. It's extremely, powerful, catchy pop songs, really well produced, despite kind of my pet peeve of that 90s sounding snare. Pulling Teeth, you just mentioned as a weaker track. That was my favorite song on the whole record, I think. And that's one that I wasn't really familiar with. I had a friend that used to sing all by myself, like just like around, and that was a blast from the past for me hearing that on this record. Yeah, totally had forgotten about that thing. Yeah, no, I understand like that the energy on this record is top priority, these short, fast, spiky songs. A lot of these songs are under 2 minutes, actually, which I was kind of surprised to see that they were, really that short, kind of going back to like, a lot of 70s punk stuff would be like that, 80s punk stuff too. My complaint is, I guess the record could use a little more variety. Or, I do understand that it's kind of just like these quick blasts of energy. So if you're not going to like vary it up and you're just going to do this particular type of song, I think the album cuts could use some stronger hooks, a lot of them. I think the middle section of this record is so strong, actually. So it opens with Burnout, which is not the best song on the record, but it's got a ton of energy. It's got those drum breaks, which is kind of like an exciting way to open the record. Then you get Having a Blast and Chump, and those are okay, but I don't think they're that memorable. They're just kind of more of what happens later in the record. But then, when you get to Longview, it's like obviously this song is a step above what I've heard so far. And like the other songs just hit immediately. You can tell they're hits, even like I don't think that is hindsight, knowing that they became hits and now like they're clearly just better songs. And you get that run 4 through 10 on this record is super solid. It's the hits plus you get Sassafras Roots and Pulling Teeth, which I think are the two best deep cuts. But those two songs in the 2 and 3 hole, and then everything after track 10, I think just isn't quite up to the same standard. So I think it's a 3.5 star record for me. I think it's really good, but not great. But even though I don't think it's a great like front to back record, and it's not a 5-star record for me, I understand the impact. I think that's undeniable. I understand why it was huge. The hits are incredibly infectious. They sound great. So yeah, uh, I had no real issue with this. I'm not here to bash Dookie, as some maybe hoped I would, but
I was hoping you'd be a little harder on it. 3.5. It's kind of like mealy right in the middle.
yeah, I
But
mean, If I have to put on a Green Day record, it'd probably be this one.
Yeah, I mean, I listening to this again for this little show, I'd heard these songs so many times because I used to listen to the radio a lot and, they were always on. But in the past 5 years, I've barely turned on a radio once. And hearing these songs, I was, just the the opening bass line on Longview with those drums is incredible. I love the that chorus, the way they're just adding, I don't know, like an open note before the power chord. It I was just like, wow, this is really advanced and sounds so good for, a pop punk band that named their album because they would get liquid diarrhea on tour. And they was going to be called Liquid Dookie, but they changed it just to Dookie, make it a little classier. I'm just, struck by how well everything is written on here, at least the hits. There's a couple throwaway tracks, and of course you'll have that on these, early types of records for these bands, but I mean, the bass and the drums are incredible, and just the song construction, I think, is just really smart and belies their age and maturity. So I do like it a lot, but if I'd never heard any of these songs before, I'd probably go 4.5, maybe. But it is sort of like, okay, I've heard this song 8,000 times, and yeah, it's really, really good, but there's not like that sense of discovery with an album like this that's kind of been played to death. It's just sort of always been there. So I only go high 4 stars for Dookie. I don't know if it's my favorite Green Day record or not. It might be. I like American Idiot a lot though, so it could be American Idiot. It could be Nimrod. I don't know. Could
Could
be
be the new,
Warning. Who knows?
could be the new one that at the time of recording this is not out yet, but I think it will be out by the time this video comes out. So
Oh yeah, January 19th. It's out next week. I had no idea it was coming out that soon. I haven't listened to a new one since 21st Century Breakdown. I might have heard Revolution Radio at some point, but I have no real recollection of it.
all right, so high four for Joe, 3.5 for me. What is it for you? Is it a classic? Is it a 5 star, 4.5 star record for you? Let us know in the comments. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.